Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of All Israel News and our sister site, All Arab News, coming to you from Jerusalem. And joined today in our continuing series of interviews with key Democrats who have worked with and for then Vice President Biden, now President Biden and his inner circle. Very honored to be joined today by Ambassador Dan Shapiro, who served as Israel's ambassador, the United States ambassador, to the United States during the Obama-Biden years. Ambassador Shapiro, thank you so much for being with us on All Israel News today.
Sure, Ambassador. It was U.S. Ambassador to Israel, and
U.S. Ambassador to Israel. Yes, I didn't want to do any fake news there, but thank you. Look, this is a highly contentious environment right now, but it's very important, and you know that our site is primarily, but not exclusively, for evangelicals around the world. So many of them are not happy. Some of them, let's say, but I still feel it's important to talk to people like Ambassador Dennis Ross, David Makovsky, who was an advisor to Secretary John Kerry, to yourself and others, as we're trying to understand, right? Who is this new president? Who are the people in his inner circle? What are their values? What's their history? Whether we agree or not on all of it, but I really, really appreciate again that you taking the time, because you have been there during some very critical, positive, and some very challenging, controversial moments in those Biden, Obama team years. So let's begin with just a few things that you saw that in your tenure as ambassador that Obama and Biden did that were very, very positive for Israel. I want, because we're starting off with the premise that, look, there are a lot of things that conservatives, Republicans, evangelicals, others have problems with. But there are things that we all agree with, and some of us don't realize what the Obama-Biden team did. I would start with Iron Dome. Why don't you talk about the funding of the Iron Dome, why that's so important? We're not going to spend a lot of time on these things, but I think it's important to set the framework. And then I want to get into how President Biden sees the Abraham Accords, how he described them in the campaign, and then we'll talk about how do you see that Biden might build on those. So that's where we're heading today.
Okay, thanks, Joel. It's great to be with you. Congratulations on the site, and it's really an honor and a pleasure to speak to your audience. And I know it's an audience that I may not have always the easiest opportunity to reach. So it's particularly, I think, a good opportunity, and I hope a good dialogue in both directions.
Thank you.
I'll just back up and just say a word about Joe Biden as a political figure in American life who has really, from his first moments in public office, and it really dates even before that, has felt a real bond with Israel. He talks about learning about the creation of Israel as a child around his parents' dinner table, and the lesson he imbibed of the importance and the necessity and the justice of the existence of a state of Israel, kind of the moral imperative, not only but also after the Holocaust, but also because of the historic Jewish connections to the Holy Land. And that there was an obligation on the United States to support and stand with Israel. And he learned that from his parents. And he took that into public life as a young senator, and he married that with a strategic understanding of the benefits to U.S. interests of having a partner, a security partner, an intelligence partner, a fellow democracy in a very unstable part of the world in the Middle East. Traveled to Israel dozens of times as a senator. Tells a famous story of meeting Golda Meir on the eve of the Yom Kippur War, and he was really personal friends with 9 Israeli prime ministers from Golda Meir all the way to Benjamin Netanyahu, who's known since the 1980s. And all through those years as a senator, was the most kind of enthusiastic supporter of U.S. support for Israel's security. He would call the assistance package to Israel the best money the United States invests anywhere. And we'd need to invent in Israel if we didn't have one, because of the way U.S. interests benefit from having that connection, that ally. He calls himself a Zionist, not a common expression for a non-Jewish politician. So this is really who he is, who he was when he became vice president for Barack Obama. Would never have served for a president who didn't share those fundamental commitments with. Iron Dome was interesting because it grew out of I think the funding for it grew out of President Obama's visit when he was a candidate for president in 2008 to Israel. He went to Sderot, the town on the northern border of Gaza that had really taken so much punishment from Hamas rockets, met people whose families who had been injured, visited houses that had been destroyed. And when he got into office a few months later, and the Israelis had this sort of pending request for funding for this technology, which some people in the Defense Department didn't think was really ready for prime time, he said, let's take another look at it. He did. And indeed,
Democrats had been famously against President Reagan's maybe grand vision of the Star, they had
missile defense,
negative Star Wars, but could this thing even work?
Yeah. So, he got behind it. Of course, Vice President Biden did as well. The first $200 million was provided in 2010, and then there's several additional streams to date. It's over, I think, a $1.5 billion program. U.S. funding has saved countless lives by intercepting probably close to 2,000 missiles now. In 2014,
I just have to say, it saved my life. I've been under it, visiting with humanitarian relief people in Sderot and Barzilai Hospital in Sderot or near Sderot and so forth. I've seen these things work, and they've saved my life as well as my friends. So
as someone who worked a lot on it, it's the most impactful program I've ever worked on in terms of life saving and really, making the world better and safer. When in 2014, when Israel was embroiled in a very intense conflict with Hamas in Gaza, they came to the White House and requested an emergency resupply because they were using up so many of their interceptor missiles for Iron Dome. And actually, it was Vice President Biden who took the lead on getting that emergency package through Congress. And in about 3-4 days, they got $225 million passed through the Congress to emergency resupply the Iron Dome. And then the other major
August 2014, just by way of context, that was the month that my wife and our 4 sons made Aliyah and arrived in the country with 4,200 rockets and missiles inbound from Gaza. We thought of it as sort of thank you presents from Hamas just for joining the Zionist cause. But anyway, that was a very challenging moment.
Yeah, but that was when Iron Dome really proved its stuff. It intercepted something like 700 or 800 missiles in those weeks, and it was really an incredible breakthrough. And then all the other really dramatic enhancements of intelligence cooperation, joint training between the militaries, other missile defense programs, tunnel detection technology programs, some other joint technology programs, and of course the $38 billion 10-year agreement on military assistance that was signed in 2016. Those are all Obama-Biden administration initiatives, but Joe Biden was deeply engaged in all of that, and it only stands to reason. This is a person who, through his higher life, has worn on his sleeve his love for Israel, his belief in the importance and justice of Israel, his belief in the obligation the United States has and the interest that the United States has in ensuring Israel's security, Israel's advancement toward peace with its neighbors, with Palestinians in a two-state solution, with Arab neighbors as they normalize and accept Israel's legitimacy, who's always stood up for Israel's legitimacy anywhere. He's offended by the notion that someone would call into question at the UN or by Palestinians and other organizations or by the BDS movement at home that there's any question about Israel's right to exist. And so this is who he is. And he'll bring those same commitments into his presidency. I believe he already has, and will surround himself with people who share those commitments.
Well, I appreciate that. And I would add one that isn't always known by pro-Israel people on the other side of the aisle, which is while most of the fleets, as it were, or squadrons of F-35 stealth, state-of-the-art fighter jets arrived during the Trump administration, they were purchased, and those deals were done often during the Obama-Biden years. So I just think it's the reason Israel has that capability that nobody else has. Eventually, the UAE will have it, it seems, but because it was decided in about 2012-13. And the first delivery, I was at when the first F-35s landed at Nevatim Air Force Base in December of 2016, just before the end of that administration. Exactly. So very interesting. And I just want it to be clear. You and I met actually at the embassy in Tel Aviv. Then you were the ambassador, and it was during a tense moment. And we had I think it was civil, but I hope it was respectful. But it was an interesting conversation about divisions over policy. But I think it is important for our readers to know that we're trying to give fair coverage here, and that there are some very, very important things that that President Biden, really does have under his belt as credentials, even though there's other areas of criticism. But in the spirit of then President Biden's intriguing inaugural address and its emphasis on unity, I don't want to get into all the domestic political issues with you right now. I think you and I are focused right now on the Middle East. And then the question is, where are areas of unity that could be bipartisan, could build upon those statements by the newly elected, newly inaugurated president, particularly in an area, in fact, it's the only area that I can think of, and I've talked to Makovsky about it, I've talked to Dennis Ross about it, and I think the three of us so far agree that the only thing that we can think of during the 2020 campaign in which President Biden, or then candidate Biden, said anything positive about anything that Donald Trump was doing was in the area of the Abraham Accords. First of all, do I have the facts right? I mean, maybe there's some other minor issue, but in terms of a major issue, I can't think of anything else.
No, I agree with that. I've said that in some other talks I've given, that as far as I know, certainly in foreign policy, the only time during the campaign that then candidate Biden said something positive about a Trump administration foreign policy initiative, it was when first the UAE normalization agreement was announced, and then again at the signing ceremony of the Abraham Accords of the UAE and Bahrain at the White House. The other ones, I think Sudan and Morocco, were so late in the campaign, like a week or two before the election, the focus was elsewhere. But on those two occasions, the campaign it put out a statement in Biden's voice, so his words, within, I don't know, minutes or an hour or two of the announcements. Remember, the UAE deal was kept under wraps and it was not really known it was coming until the president's tweet. And within an hour or two, the Biden campaign had put out a statement by Joe Biden that was, really as enthusiastic as you could imagine. He said, this is great news. This is a breakthrough. This is something we've all worked for. The normalization, the recognition of Israel's legitimacy and its normalization with its Arab neighbors has been a long-term bipartisan goal of multiple U.S. administrations. It was something he himself had worked on as vice president and even before, but as vice president, he helped the Israelis get a presence in the UAE at an international organization, the International Renewable Energy Agency, which is based in Abu Dhabi and has had an Israeli mission operating openly in it since 2015, in no small part because of his efforts. So he said, this is building on past work. It's to be congratulated. Those who did it deserve credit. And it's going to make the region safer. It's going to make U.S. interests better. It's obviously going to help Israel's security, and it's something to build on. It's something that, as president, I will work to expand. And even I love the phrase he used: challenge other nations to keep pace. He saw the UAE and, of course, Bahrain later as kind of setting the pace. And that this was something that he, as president, intends to come to others in the region and say, look how your neighbors are gaining by taking this bold and important step. It serves their own interests, but it serves other interests as well. You should be on that train as well. So it was very clear. He also said, at the time, the UAE agreement made explicit, I think, that the then discussed possible Israeli annexation of the West Bank or parts of the West Bank would not occur. Was suspended or frozen or whatever. And it was something that he also didn't think was a good idea because of the harm it would do to prospects for two-state solution. So he thought that was an additional positive, and that eventually it may be possible, as more Arab states normalize their relations with Israel, to help draw some positive momentum from Israeli-Arab normalization onto the Israeli-Palestinian track. But just on its own merits, very, very warm, very, very positive reception. And I believe he will move it forward.
It was encouraging. And it's interesting, too, that, of course, the first Israeli-Arab peace deal, 1979, with Egypt and Anwar Sadat, was done under a Democrat administration. The second Arab-Israeli deal between Israel and Jordan, then King Hussein and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, of course, was brokered or assisted, certainly, by President Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was also there during the Oslo accords and that signing and all. So but this was the first two, and then others that have come under a Republican administration. So now that Biden is in office and has said these positive things, and I think we're seeing interesting statements during the confirmation hearings, let's say of Tony Blinken to be Secretary of State and so forth. How do we build on this? And the Biden team is signaling that they want to. Okay, you're as close to us seeing a crystal ball that we can have. We don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but what are some of the steps that you would either expect or you can imagine the Biden team to take to strengthen, to solidify, and to build upon the Abraham Accords?
Right. So, what distinguishes already the normalized relations that are unfolding between the UAE and Israel and Bahrain and Israel, and to some degree Morocco as well. I think Sudan may be a little farther behind. Is the breadth and the depth and the what distinguishes them, I should say, from the Egyptian and Jordanian relations with Israel that follow those peace treaties, is the breadth and the depth and the kind of people to people and cultural nature of it, and soon, actually, it's already happening in the UAE, an economic and trade and technology dimension as well. So, all of these things are already happening. As you know, just about every Israeli family has either already been to Dubai or is planning a post-pandemic vacation there. Every venture fund, every hospital, every university, every bank, is building a partnership with a counterpart in the UAE, maybe two, one in Abu Dhabi and one in Dubai. It's almost every night you see a Zoom screen filled with young Israelis and young Emiratis kind of getting to know each other. Of course, there's all this openness to religious and cultural cross education between the two countries. So the opportunities here and the model here that's being set on that front is really exciting. Of course, it should be the way Israel relates to any country, and it now has an opportunity to do it for the first time with an Arab country, Bahrain hopefully following along. But the idea here, I think, is to of course expand each of those areas: trade, tourism, technology, cultural, religious, other investment relationships, and then demonstrate to other Arab countries and their publics and their leaders that they too can be beneficiaries of being partners to Israel, which has much to offer them. I mean, obviously, especially in the technology spheres, with all it brings in terms of water technologies and agriculture technologies and healthcare technologies and transportation technologies and everything. But not just technology. That it should be grounded in something that I think the UAE leaders have, to their credit, deserve to be recognized for, which is and the name Abraham Accords suggests this. So there's a kind of brotherhood here. There's a kind of ability to see the humanity in one another, not just to treat this as a kind of transactional kind of relationship. The hope would be, of course, even in Jordan and in Egypt, which have the security and government level peace treaties, but really don't much in the way of people to people normalization going on. And in fact, it's unpopular there. The hope is that even in those societies, they will see, gee, our neighbors in the UAE and in Bahrain and maybe some other countries are already benefiting from this relationship. Why are we kind of, holding back and losing those opportunities? And that even they will see the value. So there's opportunities to spread it to new countries and to deepen it in the countries that are already doing it and the countries that have their own peace treaties.
I think that's great. And with limited time, I just want to touch on one more piece related to Jordan because you brought it up. But so there are, of course, a number of ways that the Jordanian people actually are benefiting from the treaty: natural gas deals, water rights, and a number of ways. Although the parliament has been quite hostile to a number of these initiatives. Yeah. Just in a moment, but I think we should take more time on this maybe in a different interview, is Qasr al-Yahud. You've got the situation where President Rivlin and the Israelis want to build out the Israeli side of the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized. And of course, the Jordanians, I've been there with King Hussein sending me Prince Ghazi, the interfaith advisor to King Hussein, or I'm sorry, King Abdullah, forgive me, speaking so highly of the Jordanian national park that's built. And the theory now is, could an international park be built, bridges, millions of Christians and others coming to the region, being able to cross a bridge into Jordan, from Jordan into Israel, maybe staying at hotels in Jericho with a Palestinian connection. Is this something yet being even discussed within the Biden team? Is that something that you think would be sort of encouraging? It would be something that President Biden and his team would be looking favorably on, or is it just way too early to think that that's on their radar screens?
It's probably a little too early. There haven't been a lot of appointments made, ambassadors in the region, assistant secretaries with Near East responsibilities, the development agencies that might fund those kinds of projects. So it's a little early, I think, to expect that level of detail. But look, the broader commitment to say what we see happening now in people-to-people relationships has a peacemaking benefit, has an economic benefit, has a cultural connection benefit, and it shouldn't be restricted to Israelis and Emiratis. It should be spread to others in the region. In fact, there's a new program. Of course, Palestinians should also be part of this, and there's a new program that Congress just authorized on a bipartisan basis and funded right at the end of the Trump administration. It was signed by President Trump in the omnibus appropriations bill, called the Middle East Peace Partnership Fund. And it's designed to support people-to-people connections between Israelis and Palestinians, but there's ways of expanding that to other neighbors as well. It's designed to help promote Palestinian economic development, entrepreneurs, again, by linking them to Israeli entrepreneurs, but also other regional entrepreneurs. The whole architecture of the region can change and can be sort of exemplified by what's happening in the UAE-Israel chain, but also work to benefit Jordanians, Palestinians, Egyptians, and all of these are possible. Again, the details, I think, are going to take a little bit longer for people to get to their desks. I do want to say one other thing about it. I know we're going past the time I said, but I don't mind. There's one other way that these new normalized relations are a real benefit to the United States, which is in the security vein. It's always in the United States' interest for its partners to be partners with each other. Yeah. And of course, it's been true for a long time that Israel has had quiet, sort of under the table security dialogues with Gulf countries in particular because of the common threats they face, chiefly Iran. But now that can be done in the open, or increasingly it will be. Joint training, intelligence exchanges, trilateral exercises with U.S. Forces. This is a real benefit in two senses. One, in that it's good for Iran to see this emerging regional dynamic of an alignment of countries that are willing to operate openly, and it certainly makes it harder. It makes fewer opportunities for Iran to sow divisions among its regional rivals. And it also creates, the other part of it is it creates possibilities for the U.S. to position itself as its regional security role as a supporter of collaborating partners, not always having to take the lead on everything. And that can be a benefit to us as we, have to attend to all of our global responsibilities. We're not leaving the Middle East by any stretch of the imagination, but we have Asia, we have China, we have a lot of other Russia, we have a lot of other things to take care of. And so if there's this stronger, more stable, more openly operating partnership between Israel and Arab states, which with the U.S. as a key component of that, it's a win-win-win in terms of the interests of all parties.
I agree with you entirely on that, and I like to see areas where we can agree. I think it's something that is newsworthy in its own right, because a lot of people who love Israel on the Republican side, let's say, are anxious, hostile, concerned. Certainly, the idea of Biden going back into the nuclear deal with Iran. I know there's a lot of nuances of that, and we're going to have to see that play out. But those are already raising anxieties. But supporting the Abraham Accords, speaking well of it. And I think this thing with Jordan, too, is interesting, because I think with Christians, Jews, Muslims and Palestinians having an angle into this, this could actually be a small microcosm project that could pay some significant dividends in the ways that some of the macro projects with Jordan and Israel, natural gas, water, intelligence cooperation, none of that seems to be winning over hearts and minds in Jordan. Maybe this would, maybe this could. We'll have to see. But
It could. And look, I think the Gulf states, particularly, the UAE with its resources, and Saudi Arabia, if it will also take this very important step, and it does seem that they are open to it. We hope that, they will get there. But they obviously can be an important investor in this. I mean, they can bring to the table resources to support Palestinian, Jordanian, Israeli joint projects. They can help build those institutions and sometimes the physical infrastructure. They too can even be, look, they state that their position is still in favor of a two-state solution with the Palestinian state. They no longer adhere to the former sequence of the Arab Peace Initiative, which was first a two-state solution, only then recognition and normalization with Israel. So they've flipped that, but they still say that's their goal. But in fact, as supporters of Israelis and Palestinians achieving two states and proving their bona fides on the normalization side, they could also be, I guess you would say, maybe sources of some positive pressure or coaching on the Palestinian side about some of the things Palestinians will have to do differently and say differently, and positions that have been unrealistic that they would have to adapt to have a chance to achieve their objectives. But in the meantime, there's resources flowing that help make it possible for Israelis and Palestinians and Jordanians and others to do the things that benefit all of them, and hopefully would also provide that undergirding for an eventual two-state solution.
Great point. 2021 is going to be a very interesting year. We all, of course, are praying that it's better than the traumas of 2020, though the Abraham Accords were arguably one of the few, if not the only, bright spot in the region. And we'll see, where we go, where the Biden administration goes from here. Again, Ambassador Dan Shapiro, thank you for carving out time, and even more than you'd originally scheduled, to walk us through these issues. I couldn't be more grateful.
Well, it's my pleasure, Joel. Thanks for the opportunity. I'll be happy to come back again.
My pleasure. This is Joel Rosenberg in Jerusalem for All Israel News. Thank you for joining us.